You're waking up not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of your little brother coughing himself awake next to you. The air smells like smoke from last night's cooking fire and something else you can't quite place. Maybe the goat got into the house again. Your bed isn't really a bed, just a pile of straw covered with a rough wool blanket that your grandmother wove before you were born. It itches, but you're used to it now. Outside, the rooster is making his usual racket, which means the sun is coming up over the hills. You can hear your mother already moving around, probably trying to get the fire going again from last night's embers. Your father left before dawn. He's got to walk to the Lord's fields today to help with the harvest. That means you and your siblings will be handling most of the work around your own small plot. You stretch, feeling your joints crack. You're only 12, but your back already aches most mornings from yesterday's work. Hauling water, pulling weeds, carrying bundles of grain that seem to get heavier each year. Your hands are already rough and calloused. Nothing like the soft hands you imagine the Lord's daughters must have. The floor beneath your feet is just packed earth, cold and hard. No wooden planks, no stone tiles, just dirt that turns to mud when it rains and dust when it's dry. You step carefully around your sleeping siblings. There's barely enough room for all of you in this one room that serves as bedroom, kitchen, and living space all at once. Through the single small window, covered with oiled cloth instead of glass, you can see the village starting to wake up. Thin streams of smoke rising from other houses, the sound of someone's chickens complaining about something. Maybe a dog barking in the distance. It's going to be another long day, just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. Your stomach grumbles, reminding you that supper last night was just thin porridge and a small piece of dark bread. Breakfast will probably be more of the same if you're lucky. The harvest has been decent this year, but after the Lord takes his share and the church takes theirs, there's never quite enough left for your family. You pull on your only tunic, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before. It's patched in several places where it's worn through and it's getting too small, but there's no money for a new one. Your shoes are strips of leather tied around your feet with rope. They don't keep out the cold or the wet very well, but they're better than nothing. As you help your mother get the fire going properly, feeding it small sticks and dried grass. You wonder what it would be like to live in one of those grand houses you've heard about in stories. Houses with multiple rooms, with real beds, with servants to bring you food. But those are just stories, like tales of dragons or talking animals. This small, smoky room with your family crowded together, this is real life. The day ahead stretches out before you. Tending the vegetable garden, looking after the chickens, maybe helping to repair the fence that the neighbor's pig keeps breaking through. Simple tasks, but necessary ones. Because in a world where winter is always just a few months away, and where the Lord's steward might come by any day to collect taxes, every day is about surviving until the next one. You splash some cold water from yesterday's bucket on your face, trying to wake up fully. The water is cloudy and tastes a bit strange, but it's what you have. Clean, clear water is something you've heard about but never really experienced, like so many other things that seem to exist in some other world, far beyond the boundaries of your small village. But this is your world, small, hard, and uncertain, And today, like every day, you'll do what needs to be done to keep yourself and your family alive until tomorrow. Because that's what children do in the medieval world. They grow up fast, work hard, and hope that somehow, some way, life might get just a little bit easier. You are standing in what might once have been called a nursery, though that word feels too gentle for this place. The walls are clay-daubed timber, the gaps between them stuffed with moss and old rags that do little to keep out the wind. There's no glass in the single window, just a wooden shutter that hangs crooked on leather hinges. The floor is packed earth, swept clean but still cold beneath your bare feet. Your bed is a straw mattress shared with your younger sister who coughs in her sleep. The straw crackles when you move, and sometimes something small scurries out from underneath. A thin woolen blanket covers you both, patched so many times it's more patches than original cloth. Your mother spun the wool herself, though the sheep it came from died last winter. The morning begins before dawn, not with the gentle shake of a loving parent, but with the sound of your father's boots on the earthen floor and your mother's quiet movements around the fire pit. There are no warm embraces, no soft words. Affection is rationed like bread. Not because your parents don't care, but because caring too much in a world this hard can break you. Children die often from fever, from hunger, from accidents that would be minor today, but are fatal here. Love is dangerous when loss is so common. You wake because you're cold and because your stomach is empty. It always is. The first task is to help rekindle the fire from last night's banked coals. You blow gently on the embers, feeding them dried grass and twigs until flames catch. If the fire died completely in the night, the morning becomes much harder. Flint and steel are precious, and failure means a cold day with no cooked food. By age 5, you have work, not pretend work. Not games disguised as chores, but actual labor that matters to your family's survival. You gather eggs from the chickens if they've laid any. You fetch water from the well, carrying a wooden bucket that seems to weigh more than you do. You help your mother tend the vegetable patch, pulling weeds and chasing away birds that want to steal the precious seeds. There are no toys except what you make yourself. A stick becomes a horse. Stones become soldiers, mud becomes anything your imagination needs it to be. You play, yes, but quietly and only when the work is done. Loud children attract attention, and attention from adults is rarely good for children. You learn early to be useful and invisible. School doesn't exist, not for children like you. Reading and writing are mysteries practiced by priests and nobles, as foreign to your world as flying or breathing underwater. Your education comes through watching, listening, copying. You learn which plants are safe to eat, how to tell if an animal is sick, when to plant and when to harvest. This knowledge might save your life someday. Books won't. Food is scarce and precious. You eat what's available when it's available. Porridge made from whatever grain survived the winter. Turnips, always turnips. Bread so hard you have to soak it in watered ale to chew it. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days or when an animal dies unexpectedly. You learn not to complain about the taste, not to leave crumbs, not to ask for more when there isn't any. Your clothes are hand-me-downs from older siblings, patched and repatched until they're more repair than original fabric. They itch constantly from the rough wool and the lice that live in the seams. Everyone has lice. It's not a sign of filth, but of life itself. You scratch without thinking, leaving red marks on your arms and legs that never quite heal. When you're sick, there's no medicine beyond what grows wild in the forest. Your mother might brew a tea from willow bark for pain or make a poultice from honey and herbs for cuts. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes children simply disappear into fever and never come back. The family mourns briefly, quietly, then continues because stopping means everyone else might die too. You sleep when it's dark because candles cost money your family doesn't have. You wake when it's light because there's work to be done. Time isn't measured in hours, but in seasons, in tasks completed, in whether you have enough food to last until the next harvest. The rhythm of your days follows the sun and the stomach, nothing more. Death is not hidden from you. You see animals slaughtered for food. You attend funerals of neighbors, relatives, siblings. You understand even at 6 years old that life is fragile and that today might be your last. This doesn't make you sad exactly, just realistic. You learn to find joy in small things, a successful harvest, a day without rain, a moment by the fire when your belly isn't completely empty. Your parents don't read you bedtime stories, but sometimes your grandmother tells tales by firelight. Stories of saints and monsters, of heroes and fools, of times when the world was different or might be different again. These stories aren't entertainment. They're lessons wrapped in wonder, teaching you how to behave, what to fear, what to hope for. You learn your place early. You are not destined for greatness, for adventure, for choosing your own path. You will grow up to work the same land your father works, to marry someone chosen by your parents, to have children who will live the same life you're living now. This isn't oppression, it's simply how the world works. The idea of change, of betterment, of escape. These are concepts that don't exist in your vocabulary. By 8, you're working in the fields during harvest time. Your small hands better suited to certain tasks than adult fingers. You learn to move quickly but carefully, to spot the difference between ripe and rotten, to work through exhaustion because the grain won't wait for you to feel better. Your back aches, your feet blister. But you don't complain because everyone's back aches. Everyone's feet blister. The lord of the manor is a distant figure, someone you might glimpse once or twice in your entire childhood. But his presence shapes your life through his representatives. The steward who collects grain, the reeve who assigns work, the bailiff who settles disputes. These men have power over your family's survival, and you learn early to bow your head when they pass, to speak only when spoken to never question their decisions. Religion fills the gaps between work and sleep. You attend Mass on Sundays, standing in the cold stone church while the priest speaks Latin words you don't understand. You learn prayers by repetition, not comprehension. You confess sins you're not sure you've committed and receive penances you perform without question. God is distant but watchful, ready to punish but slow to reward. Faith is less about love than about fear and duty. The changing seasons mark your growing up. Planting time when you help scatter seeds. Harvest time when you work until your hands bleed. Winter when you huddle close to the fire and pray the food lasts until spring. Each year that passes without your death is a small victory, though no one celebrates it. Survival isn't an achievement. It's simply what's expected. You don't dream of becoming a knight or a scholar or traveling to distant lands. These possibilities don't exist in your world. You dream, if you dream at all, of having enough to eat, of staying warm through winter, of not losing any more siblings to sickness or accident. Your ambitions are measured in comfort, not conquest. And somehow, despite everything, the hunger, the cold, the constant work, the ever-present threat of death, you find moments of happiness. A shared joke with your sister, a particularly good harvest, a day when your father smiles at something you've done well. These moments are brief and precious, hoarded in memory like coins in a miser's purse. You are a medieval child, and this is your world, small, hard, uncertain, but also somehow complete. You don't know what you're missing because you've never had it. And in that ignorance, perhaps, lies a kind of peace that children of later ages, with their endless possibilities and crushing expectations, might almost envy. The sun sets as it always does, and you curl up beside your sister on the straw mattress, listening to the familiar sounds of night. Your parents' quiet conversation by the dying fire, the wind through the thatch, the distant howl of something wild in the forest. Tomorrow will bring the same work, the same struggles, the same small victories and defeats. But tonight, you are warm enough, fed enough, alive enough. And in a medieval childhood, that is everything. As the village settles into the rhythm of winter's grip, the children of this medieval world begin to stir with their own quiet energy. Not the organized energy of modern playgrounds or scheduled activities, but something more primal, more inventive, born from necessity and shaped by the materials at hand. Children here don't have toys in any sense we'd recognize. No wooden soldiers carved by skilled craftsmen, no dolls with painted faces and silk dresses. What they have instead are scraps, remnants, and whatever their small hands can fashion from the world around them. A stick becomes a sword, a horse, a walking companion. Stones transform into castles, armies, or simply things to throw at other things. A handful of dried beans might become counters for a game played in the dirt, or tokens in some elaborate fantasy that unfolds over hours. The games they play are ancient ones, passed down not through books but through whispered instructions from older children to younger ones. They play knuckle bones with actual sheep bones, tossing them in patterns that test skill and luck. They spin wooden tops carved roughly by their fathers during long winter evenings, watching them wobble across uneven floors. When the weather allows, they venture outside to play blind man's bluff, hide and seek among the haystacks, or simple racing games that require nothing but feet and the willingness to run. But childhood here is not separate from the adult world. It bleeds into it constantly. A 10-year-old might spend the morning helping her mother card wool, her fingers learning the rhythm and tension needed to prepare the fibers for spinning. By afternoon, she's playing house with her younger sister, reenacting the same domestic scenes she's been observing and participating in since she could walk. The play is practice, and the practice is survival training disguised as fun. Boys learn to whittle not because someone teaches them woodworking, but because they watch their fathers repair tools and want to try. Their first attempts are clumsy, dangerous affairs that result in cut fingers and scolding, but gradually they develop the skill to carve simple toys for themselves and their siblings. A wooden hoop that can be rolled with a stick becomes a prized possession, something to race alongside friends or guide through obstacle courses of their own devising. The children make music too, though not with instruments crafted by skilled musicians. They fashion crude flutes from hollow reeds, bang rhythms on overturned pots, and sing songs that have been passed down through generations. Many of these songs are work songs, learned while helping with chores, but they transform in children's mouths into play songs, full of nonsense words and silly verses that make even the adults smile. Water becomes a source of endless fascination when it's available. In summer, they might dam a small stream with stones and mud, creating pools for floating bark boats or catching minnows with their bare hands. In winter, ice provides its own entertainment. They slide on frozen puddles, break off icicles to use as swords in mock battles, and sometimes, if they're very lucky and very careful, they might be allowed to help harvest ice for the manor's ice house. The children of the village are storytellers too, spinning tales that blend half-remembered fragments of adult conversations with wild flights of imagination. They tell ghost stories that make each other shriek with delighted terror, adventure tales featuring brave knights and clever peasants, and magical stories where ordinary objects possess supernatural powers. These stories aren't written down, but they live in the collective memory of childhood, evolving with each telling. Their play often mirrors the adult world in miniature. They hold mock trials for captured beetles accused of stealing crumbs. They stage elaborate weddings between dolls made from bundled straw and scraps of cloth. They organize hunts for imaginary beasts, using slingshots made from leather strips and Y-shaped branches to target trees and fence posts. Sometimes they play at being merchants, trading acorns for pebbles with the serious intensity of real commerce. But perhaps most remarkably, these children find joy in the simplest things. A puddle becomes an ocean for stick boats. A pile of autumn leaves transforms into a dragon's hoard to be defended or stolen. The shadow of a flying bird on the ground becomes a monster to be chased and conquered. They have learned to extract entertainment from the most basic elements of their world because that is all they have, and somehow it is enough. The older children take responsibility for the younger ones, not because they're asked to, but because that's how families survive. A 12-year-old boy will patiently teach his 5-year-old brother how to skip stones, how to tie knots, how to whistle. A girl of 8 will show her toddling sister how to braid grass into rough dolls, how to identify which berries are safe to eat, how to move quietly when the adults are talking about serious things. They create elaborate games of pretend that can last for days. Today, they might be pilgrims on a dangerous journey, using the village paths as roads to distant shrines. Tomorrow, they could be merchants crossing foreign lands with sacks of dried corn standing in for exotic spices. The day after that, they might be knights and ladies acting out stories they've heard sung by traveling minstrels, complete with dramatic sword fights and passionate declarations of love. When darkness falls early, as it does for so many months of the year, the children gather around the fire with the adults. But their minds are still active, still creative. They play word games, riddles that test wit and memory. They engage in competitive storytelling, each child trying to top the previous tale with something more exciting, more magical, more impossible. They practice juggling with small stones or dried beans, often dropping them into the fire with small pops and hisses that make everyone laugh. The church provides its own forms of entertainment for children, though it might not recognize them as such. During long services, they play quiet games of their own devising. They count stones in the walls, memorize the patterns of light filtering through windows, or create silent competitions to see who can sit still the longest. They turn the ritual of Mass into a kind of performance to be observed and in their own way critiqued. During feast days and holy celebrations, the children have chances for more organized revelry. They might participate in simple dances, holding hands in circles and moving to ancient rhythms that predate Christianity but have been absorbed into religious celebration. They help with pageants and mystery plays, sometimes playing angels or shepherds, learning to project their young voices and move with purpose across makeshift stages. Food becomes play when it's available. They compete to see who can eat the most porridge, who can peel an apple in one long strip, who can crack nuts most efficiently. They make faces in puddings with their spoons and sculpture crude figures from bread dough when their mothers aren't watching. Even hunger becomes a game sometimes, with contests to see who can go longest without complaining about empty stomachs. The children learn to find entertainment in work itself. Gathering firewood becomes a treasure hunt. Feeding chickens transforms into a military operation with strategy and tactics. Churning butter turns into a rhythm game, with children taking turns to see who can maintain the steady motion longest. They discover that almost any task can be made into a competition if you approach it with the right attitude. They are endlessly inventive with discarded materials. Broken pottery shards become pieces in elaborate board games scratched into dirt floors. Worn-out clothing is transformed into costumes for dramatic performances. Empty grain sacks become capes, bags for collecting treasures, or material for crude tents where secret meetings can be held. The changing seasons provide their own entertainment. Spring brings new games as the world awakens. They hunt for birds' eggs, though they're careful not to take too many. They gather flowers to weave into crowns and chains, creating elaborate decorations for imaginary ceremonies. They catch frogs and salamanders, marveling at these creatures before releasing them back to their homes. Summer offers different pleasures. They might be allowed to help with haymaking, turning the serious work of harvest into games of hide and seek among the tall grass. They gather berries, competing to see who can fill their containers fastest while somehow managing to eat more than they collect. They catch fireflies in the long twilight hours, holding these tiny lights in cupped hands and marveling at their magic. Autumn brings its own gifts. They collect nuts and acorns, not just for food, but for games and crafts. They help with apple harvest, learning to climb trees and developing contests around who can pick the most fruit or reach the highest branches. They gather colorful leaves for decoration and play, using them as money in elaborate trading games or as tokens in complex competitions of their own devising. Even winter, harsh as it is, offers opportunities for play. They build snow figures when the weather permits, though these are usually crude affairs that barely resemble their intended subjects. They create ice sculptures in puddles, watching their breath cloud in the cold air and pretending to be dragons breathing smoke. They tell stories about winter spirits and snow giants, frightening and delighting each other in equal measure. The children develop their own social hierarchies and rules, completely separate from the adult world. They have leaders who emerge not through birthright, but through charisma, cleverness, or simply the ability to come up with the best games. They create secret clubs with passwords and initiation rituals, usually involving some combination of physical challenges and solemn vows to keep certain knowledge hidden from adults. They are remarkably resilient in their play, adapting quickly when games go wrong or when adult intervention disrupts their activities. If a ball made from bundled rags falls apart, they immediately invent a new game using the scattered pieces. If rain drives them indoors, they transform the cramped quarters into a stage for dramatic performances or a battlefield for elaborate campaigns fought with wooden spoons and imagination. Music and rhythm permeate their play in ways that would seem impossible given their limited access to actual instruments. They create complex hand-clapping games with intricate patterns that must be memorized and executed perfectly. They invent songs to accompany their work and play, often incorporating nonsense syllables that sound ancient and mysterious. They drum on anything that will make noise, from overturned buckets to the wooden walls of their homes. The children become expert observers of the adult world, and their play often involves sophisticated mimicry of grown-up behaviors. They hold mock courts where stuffed animals are tried for various crimes. They stage elaborate negotiations between different groups, practicing the art of diplomacy they observe in their elders. They reenact the dramas and conflicts they witness, working through complex emotions and social dynamics in the safe space of play. They create elaborate fantasy worlds with detailed rules and consistent internal logic. A corner of the barn might become a castle under siege, complete with defenders, attackers, and complex battle strategies. A grove of trees transforms into an enchanted forest where magical creatures live and epic quests unfold over weeks or months. These games become so detailed and involving that the children sometimes seem to inhabit them more fully than the real world. Their play often involves sophisticated problem-solving and creativity. They learn to engineer simple machines using sticks and ropes. They develop complex systems for fair distribution of found treasures. They create elaborate plots for their dramatic performances, working out character motivations and story arcs with the intensity of professional playwrights. The children are also natural scientists, conducting experiments with the materials available to them. They test which objects float and which sink in water. They observe which plants attract which insects. They study the behavior of animals, both domestic and wild, developing theories about motivation and intelligence that they test through careful observation. Perhaps most importantly, they learn to create joy from nothing. In a world where entertainment must be self-generated, where every pleasure must be earned or invented, these children develop in creativity and resourcefulness that serves them throughout their lives. They understand instinctively that happiness is not something that happens to you, but something you create for yourself through ingenuity, cooperation, and the willingness to find wonder in the most ordinary circumstances. When they grow up, these children will carry with them not just the skills they learned through play, but the knowledge that entertainment and joy can be found anywhere, fashioned from anything, shared with anyone willing to join in the game. They will teach their own children not through formal instruction, but through example, showing them how to transform the world around them into a stage for imagination and delight. And so the cycle continues, generation after generation, in the quiet corners of the medieval world where children play their ancient games and invent new ones, finding in their simple pleasures a kind of wealth that no lord or king could ever truly possess. You're a medieval child, barely 8 years old, waking to another day that will be filled with small adventures and simple pleasures that cost nothing but imagination. The sun filters through the gaps in your family's thatch roof, and you can already hear your mother stirring the breakfast pot over the dying embers of last night's fire. Your stomach rumbles, but you're used to that. Food comes when it comes, and when it doesn't, you find other ways to fill the time. Outside, the village is beginning to stir. You can hear old Thomas coughing in the next hut over, and somewhere a rooster is announcing the day with more confidence than anyone really feels. Your bare feet hit the packed dirt floor, and you're immediately awake. There's no lingering in bed when the world is waiting, especially when your bed is just a straw mattress you share with 2 siblings and possibly a chicken that wandered in during the night. Your day doesn't begin with lessons or schedules. There are no books, no teachers, no desks arranged in neat rows. Instead, your education comes from watching, listening, and trying not to get in the way while the adults do the serious business of staying alive. But that doesn't mean your childhood is empty. Far from it. It's filled with games that would mystify modern children, adventures that require nothing but sticks and stones and a kind of freedom that comes from having very little to lose. You step outside into a world that belongs to children during the brief moments when adults are too busy to notice what you're doing. The village lane is your playground, the nearby woods your kingdom, and every puddle, rock, and fallen branch a potential toy. This is where your day truly begins, not with obligations, but with possibilities. The morning air is crisp, and you can see your breath in small puffs that disappear almost immediately. Winter mornings are the best for certain games, especially the ones that involve seeing how long you can make your breath visible or how far you can slide on the patches of ice that form in the deeper ruts of the village path. Your first task, if you can call it that, is usually to help your mother with the morning routine. This might mean fetching water from the well, a job that's both important and entertaining. The well is a gathering place for the village children, and while you wait your turn, games spontaneously emerge. Someone starts a clapping song, and soon half a dozen small voices are chanting verses that have been passed down through generations of children, each one adding their own embellishments or forgetting crucial words that get replaced with nonsense syllables that somehow make perfect sense. The water bucket is heavy, but you've learned the trick of walking slowly and keeping your eyes on the horizon rather than watching the water slosh. Spilled water means another trip, and another trip means less time for the important business of play. As you make your way back to your family's hut, you're already planning the day's adventures with the other children who are emerging from their own morning chores like small, determined creatures emerging from their burrows. Your mother takes the water with a nod of approval and perhaps a quick pat on your head if you've managed not to spill too much. Then comes breakfast, which is usually a bowl of whatever's been simmering in the pot since yesterday, supplemented by a piece of bread that's hard enough to require serious chewing. You eat quickly, not because you're in a hurry, but because the food doesn't taste particularly good and it's better to get it over with so you can focus on more interesting things. The real day begins when you're finally released from the immediate vicinity of home and allowed to join the loose confederation of village children who range in age from barely walking to nearly adult. This group operates without formal leadership, but with a complex social structure that shifts depending on the game, the season, and who has recently done something impressive or embarrassing. You know your place in this hierarchy, and it changes regularly based on your latest achievements or failures in the endless competitions that make up childhood. The first decision of the day is always what to play, and this requires a negotiation process that can take longer than the game itself. Someone suggests hide and seek, which is immediately vetoed by the older children who consider it too simple. Another voice calls for a game of tag, but the youngest ones complain that they can never catch anyone. Eventually, consensus emerges around a game that involves throwing stones at a target, not because everyone loves it, but because it's the first suggestion that doesn't generate immediate opposition. The target is usually a stick stuck in the ground or a particular stone that someone has designated as special. The stones you throw are carefully selected for their size, weight, and throwing qualities. There's an art to choosing the right stone, and children can spend considerable time examining candidates, testing their heft, and arguing about which ones are likely to fly true. The game itself is simple, but the drama surrounding it is complex, involving accusations of cheating, debates about scoring, and elaborate victory celebrations that often last longer than the actual competition. Between organized games, there are the quieter pleasures that fill the spaces in a medieval child's day. You might spend an hour examining the contents of a puddle, watching insects navigate the miniature world you've created by dropping twigs and leaves into the water. Or you could become fascinated by the way shadows move across the ground as the sun travels overhead, creating a constantly changing landscape of light and dark that provides endless entertainment for a mind that hasn't yet learned to be bored by simple things. One of the most popular activities is storytelling, though it bears little resemblance to the formal bedtime stories of later eras. Instead, it's a collaborative process where one child begins a tale and others add details, characters, and plot twists until the original story has transformed into something entirely unexpected. These stories often feature talking animals, magical objects, and heroes who accomplish impossible tasks through cleverness rather than strength. The tales are never written down, so they change with each telling, growing more elaborate or more absurd depending on the mood of the storytellers. Sometimes an adult will join these storytelling sessions, usually an older woman who has finished her morning chores and has a few minutes to spare before the next crisis demands her attention. These adults bring a different quality to the stories, adding elements of genuine folklore and remembered tales that connect the children to a larger world beyond their village. They might tell stories of saints who performed miracles, or of clever peasants who outwitted cruel lords, or of magical creatures that live in the deep woods and only reveal themselves to children who are brave enough to venture beyond the familiar paths. The stories often serve as informal education, teaching lessons about courage, kindness, and the importance of being clever when you can't be strong. They're filled with moral instruction disguised as entertainment, showing children how to navigate a world that can be harsh and unfair, but also magical and full of possibilities for those who know how to look for them. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher, the games tend to become more physical and more adventurous. This is when you might venture beyond the immediate safety of the village, exploring the edges of the forest, or following the stream to see where it leads. These expeditions require careful planning and considerable courage, not because the dangers are necessarily real, but because the unknown is always frightening, even when it's only a few hundred yards from home. The forest is a place of wonder and terror for medieval children. It's where wolves might live, where bandits could be hiding, where strange lights are sometimes seen dancing between the trees on dark nights. But it's also where the best berries grow, where interesting rocks can be found, and where the really good adventures happen. You approach it with a mixture of excitement and caution, ready to run at the first sign of danger, but hoping that today might be the day you discover something truly extraordinary. The games you play in the forest are different from the ones in the village. They're quieter, more exploratory, involving careful observation of animal tracks, the construction of small shelters from fallen branches, and the collection of interesting objects that might prove useful later. You learn to move quietly, to notice things that adults miss, and to find your way back home even when the familiar landmarks have disappeared behind the trees. One of the most treasured discoveries is a good climbing tree, one with branches positioned at just the right intervals to allow a small person to ascend safely while providing an excellent view of the surrounding countryside. From the top of such a tree, the world looks entirely different. The village becomes a collection of tiny huts scattered across the landscape, and you can see for miles in every direction, imagining other villages, other children, other lives beyond the boundaries of your own experience. These moments of solitude and perspective are rare in a medieval child's life, which is usually spent in the company of family and neighbors in spaces that offer little privacy. The tree becomes a secret refuge, a place where you can think your own thoughts and dream your own dreams without interruption. You might spend an hour just watching the clouds move across the sky, making up stories about their shapes or observing the behavior of birds and small animals that don't know they're being watched. The climb down is always more difficult than the climb up, requiring careful attention to foot placement and a healthy respect for gravity. But the sense of accomplishment that comes from successfully completing the journey is immense, and you return to ground level with a feeling of having accomplished something significant, even if no one else will ever know about it. As the day wears on and hunger begins to make itself known, you start thinking about the midday meal and the brief rest that usually follows it. But there's always time for one more game, one more exploration, one more attempt to push the boundaries of what's possible in a world that offers few opportunities for excitement, but unlimited scope for imagination. The games you play as a medieval child aren't just entertainment. Their preparation for the adult world you'll soon enter, teaching you skills that will prove essential in a life that demands resourcefulness, cooperation, and the ability to find joy in simple pleasures. You're learning to negotiate, to lead and follow, to win and lose gracefully, and to create something from nothing using only your imagination and whatever materials happen to be at hand. But you're not thinking about any of that as you race through the village lanes with your friends, laughing at jokes that make perfect sense to children and no sense at all to adults. Planning adventures that will probably never happen but are wonderful to contemplate. You're simply living in the moment as children have always done, finding magic in the ordinary and making the best of whatever the day brings your way. The afternoon brings different opportunities and different challenges. This is when you might be called upon to help with real work, the kind that contributes to your family's survival rather than just keeping you occupied. But even work can become a game when you approach it with the right attitude and the company of other children who are facing the same tasks. Gathering kindling, for example, is much more interesting when it becomes a competition to see who can collect the most sticks, or who can find the straightest branch, or who can carry the largest bundle without dropping it. The work gets done, but it doesn't feel like work when it's approached as a challenge to be met with friends rather than a burden to be endured alone. Similarly, helping with the harvest, watching over younger children, or assisting with simple household tasks all become opportunities for games and social interaction when shared with other children. You learn to make the best of whatever situation you find yourself in, to find entertainment, the most mundane activities, and to maintain your sense of play even when the adult world is pressing in around you with its demands and responsibilities. The afternoon is also when you might have the opportunity to learn from the older children, who serve as informal teachers and mentors in the complex social world of medieval childhood. They show you how to whistle through your fingers, how to skip stones across the surface of a pond, how to weave grass into simple baskets, and how to identify which berries are safe to eat and which ones will make you sick. This knowledge is passed down through generations of children, creating an underground curriculum that runs parallel to the more formal education you might receive from adults. It's practical knowledge, tested by experience and refined through countless repetitions, covering everything from the best way to catch a frog to the most effective techniques for avoiding chores without getting into serious trouble. The older children also serve as protectors and guides when the group ventures into potentially dangerous territory. They know which adults are likely to be sympathetic to children's games and which ones are better avoided. They understand the unwritten rules that govern behavior in different parts of the village, and they can sense when a situation is becoming dangerous before the younger children have noticed anything amiss. In return for this guidance and protection, you offer loyalty, admiration, and the promise that you'll do the same for the next generation of children when your time comes to be one of the older ones. It's an informal system of mutual support that operates below the radar of adult supervision, creating a parallel society with its own customs, hierarchies, and codes of conduct. The late afternoon is often the time for the most ambitious projects, the ones that require sustained effort and careful planning. This might involve the construction of a fort from fallen branches and stones, an elaborate game that involves the entire group of children, or an exploration of some previously unvisited corner of the local landscape. These projects often fail spectacularly, but failure is rarely seen as a serious setback. Instead, it becomes part of the story, something to laugh about and learn from as you plan the next attempt. The process is often more important than the result, providing opportunities for collaboration, creativity, and the kind of problem-solving that will prove essential in adult life. You learn to work with limited materials, to compromise when your vision conflicts with practical limitations, and to persist in the face of obstacles that might seem insurmountable to someone who hasn't yet learned the power of determination combined with flexibility. You discover that most problems have multiple solutions, and that the obvious approach isn't always the best one. These lessons are learned through experience rather than instruction, absorbed gradually through trial and error rather than taught through formal lessons. They become part of your understanding of how the world works, shaping your approach to challenges and opportunities throughout your life. As the sun begins to sink toward the horizon and the shadows grow longer, the pace of play gradually slows. This is the time for quieter games, for reflection on the day's adventures, and for the gradual transition back toward the domestic world of family and home. You might spend this time sitting by the stream, throwing pebbles into the water and watching the ripples spread across the surface. Or you could lie on your back in the grass, staring up at the sky and trying to count the clouds, or making up stories about the shapes you see in their constantly changing forms. These moments of quiet contemplation are as important as the more active games and adventures. They provide time for processing the day's experiences, for allowing your imagination to roam freely, and for developing the inner life that will sustain you through the challenges and disappointments that are an inevitable part of growing up. The transition from play to evening responsibilities is usually gradual rather than abrupt. You begin to drift back toward home as hunger and tiredness make themselves known, but there's always time for one last game, one final adventure before the day officially ends. This might be a quick game of tag in the fading light, a final attempt to solve some puzzle that has been occupying your attention all day, or simply a few minutes spent talking with your friends about plans for tomorrow's adventures. The day doesn't end so much as fade away, leaving behind memories that will be polished and elaborated through countless retellings in the days and weeks to come. The evening meal is usually a more formal affair than the casual breakfast, involving the entire family gathered around the fire, sharing whatever food is available and exchanging stories about the day's events. This is when you might be called upon to account for your activities, to explain any minor injuries or torn clothing, and to demonstrate that you've learned something useful from your day of play. But it's also when you have the opportunity to share your own stories, to describe the adventures you've had and the discoveries you've made. Your audience may be small and sometimes distracted, but they're genuinely interested in your experiences, understanding that childhood adventures are not just entertainment, but preparation for the more serious business of adult life. As darkness falls and the fire burns lower, the day of play gradually gives way to the evening routine of family life. But the games and adventures of the day don't simply disappear. They become part of your growing store of experiences, contributing to your understanding of the world and your place in it. Tomorrow will bring new games, new adventures, and new opportunities to explore the world beyond the boundaries of home. But tonight, as you settle down to sleep surrounded by family and lulled by the familiar sounds of the village at rest, you carry with you the satisfaction of a day well spent and the anticipation of whatever wonders tomorrow might bring. The games you've played today will be forgotten in their details, but their essence will remain with you always. The laughter, the friendship, the sense of discovery, the joy of creation and exploration. These are the gifts of childhood that no amount of hardship or responsibility can entirely take away. They're the foundation upon which you'll build your adult life, the source of resilience that will carry you through whatever challenges lie ahead. And so you sleep, dreaming perhaps of tomorrow's adventure, secure in the knowledge that being a child in any era, even the hardest ones, comes with its own special magic that no one can take away from you. The games will continue, the laughter will return, and the world will always hold new wonders for those who know how to look for them with the eyes of a child. You've survived another long day in this forgotten corner of the world, where time moves differently and each season blends into the next like watercolors in rain. Your back aches from hauling water, your hands are rough from mending yet another hole in the roof, and your stomach reminds you that dinner will be the same thin soup it was yesterday. But something else stirs in the quiet evening air as you sit by the dying fire. It starts with the children, as most things do. Little hands reaching for scraps of cloth, for sticks worn smooth by handling, for anything that might become something else in the fading light. You watch your daughter balance a cornhusk doll on her knee, whispering secrets that make no sense but somehow matter deeply. Your son builds towers from pebbles and declares them castles. Kingdoms, entire worlds where he rules with the authority of someone who has never doubted that imagination can reshape reality. This is how it begins. Not with grand plans or elaborate toys purchased from distant markets, but with the simple, stubborn human need to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. To take the raw materials of a hard life and spin them into something that glimmers, even briefly, with wonder. The adults join slowly, almost reluctantly. Your neighbor brings out a wooden flute carved years ago from a fallen branch, its notes wavering but sweet in the cool air. Someone else begins to hum, then to sing words passed down from grandmothers who learned them from their own grandmothers. Songs that carry the weight of memory but also the lightness of melody. Voices layer upon each other like stones in a wall, building something sturdy enough to hold the gathering darkness at bay. Your wife produces a basket of wool, not for spinning tonight, but for the children to wind into patterns, to braid into ropes for games you half remember from your own childhood. The old man from the cottage by the elm starts telling a story about a clever fox and a proud rooster, his voice rising and falling with practiced rhythm, drawing smiles from faces that have seen too much worry lately. And you realize something profound is happening here by the fire. These are not the elaborate entertainments of nobles with their minstrels and jesters, their carved chess sets and illuminated manuscripts. This is play born of necessity, creativity carved from scarcity, joy distilled from the simplest ingredients. It costs nothing but time and attention, yet it transforms the evening from mere endurance into something approaching celebration. The games emerge organically. A circle forms for storytelling, each person adding a line to a tale that grows more ridiculous with each contribution. Someone produces a set of knuckle bones, and soon there's a tournament of sorts, with victories measured in laughter rather than coin. The children chase fireflies between the cottages, their delighted shrieks echoing off the walls like music. You join a group attempting to solve riddles posed by the village elder, who delights in watching grown adults scratch their heads over wordplay that seemed simple when you were young. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer comes to you suddenly, and you feel that particular satisfaction of a puzzle solved, a small victory against confusion. As the night deepens, the play becomes quieter but no less meaningful. Couples walk slowly around the perimeter of the village, speaking in low voices about hopes and plans and the small disappointments of daily life. Older children take responsibility for the younger ones, teaching them games of string and shadow, passing down knowledge that has no formal school but never fails to find its students. You find yourself carving a simple toy from a piece of wood, your knife moving almost without conscious thought as you shape something that might become a horse, a bird, or simply an object smooth and pleasant to hold. It's not art in any grand sense, but there's satisfaction in the work, in creating something where nothing existed before. The evening stretches on, unmarked by clocks or schedules, measured only by the gradual dimming of the fire and the slow settling of voices into quieter rhythms. Someone brings out a board scratched into a flat stone, and you remember the rules of a game learned in childhood, moving pebbles across lines worn smooth by countless fingers before yours. When the youngest children begin to nod against their mother's shoulders, the gathering doesn't end so much as it dissolves. People drifting back to their homes with the contentment that comes from time well spent. You bank the fire carefully, ensuring coals will remain for morning, and help gather the scattered toys and tools of the evening's entertainment. As you settle into your straw bed, listening to the familiar sounds of your family breathing in sleep around you, you reflect on what has just occurred. In a world where survival demands constant effort and attention, where pleasure is often viewed with suspicion by church and lord alike, your community has carved out space for something else entirely. Not rebellion exactly, but a quiet insistence that life should contain more than mere endurance. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same aching back and empty stomach, an endless round of chores. But tonight, for a few precious hours, you were more than peasants scratching out an existence on the margins of history. You were people at play, finding joy in each other's company, creating beauty from nothing more than imagination and community. The children's laughter still echoes faintly in your memory as sleep takes hold. And in that sound, you hear something that no amount of hardship can quite extinguish. The irrepressible human capacity to find light in darkness, to make something beautiful from the simplest materials, to transform any space, however humble, into a stage for wonder. This is what childhood looks like at the edge of the world, where maps end and memory begins. It's not carefree or innocent in the way we might imagine childhood should be, but it's real, and it's resilient, and it's threaded through with moments of pure magic that make even the hardest life worth living. In the gentle valleys of medieval Europe, where children were born not into comfort but into a world that demanded their hands work before their hearts had time to dream, play was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Not because the world was kind enough to offer leisure, but because the human spirit, even in its smallest form, refuses to be entirely crushed by circumstance. The children of these forgotten villages, whose names were never written in any chronicle, whose faces were never painted by any artist, found joy in the spaces between survival. They created games from nothing because nothing was often all they had. A wooden stick became a sword, a horse, a walking staff for an imaginary journey beyond the muddy boundaries of their world. Stones gathered from the riverbank transformed into armies, into currency for elaborate trading games, into building blocks for miniature castles that would stand until the next rain washed them back into the earth. In the long summer evenings when the work was finally done and the adults sat exhausted by their hearths, children would gather in the village square or the common field. Their laughter would rise like smoke, carrying games passed down through generations of small hands and whispered rules. They played knucklebones with actual bones saved from the stew pot, tossing them into the air and catching them on the backs of their hands with a dexterity that came from fingers accustomed to delicate work. Spinning thread, sorting grain, mending nets. Hide and seek took on a different character in a world where every shadow might conceal real danger. Children learned to disappear into haystacks, behind stone walls, under bridges, developing an intimacy with their landscape that served them well in games and sometimes in life. The child who could vanish completely, who could move through the village like a whisper, was admired not just for their skill, but for their wisdom. They invented elaborate games of make-believe that reflected their world but transformed it. The village baker's daughter might play at being a queen, using a crown woven from wheat stalks, holding court in the ruins of an old stone foundation. The blacksmith's son would organize mock battles where sticks clashed against shields made from barrel lids, and every child could be a hero for an afternoon, victorious against imaginary enemies that were far kinder than the real ones that stalked their parents' dreams. Music emerged from whatever could make a sound. Hollow reeds became flutes, though few children had the patience to learn proper melodies. Instead, they created rhythms by striking stones together, by clapping, by stamping their feet in patterns that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory. They sang songs that mixed half-remembered lullabies with nonsense words of their own invention, creating a folklore that existed only in the moment, disappearing with the morning mist. During the long winter months when the world outside was too harsh for outdoor play, children gathered around the fire and told stories. Not the polished tales that traveled with merchants and minstrels, but raw, immediate narratives born from their own experience and imagination. They spoke of mice that could talk, of trees that granted wishes, of magical shoes that could carry you beyond the forest to places where bread was always soft and the sun always warm. The games they played often mimicked the work they would soon inherit. Little girls practiced at keeping house with dolls made from corn husks and scraps of cloth, creating elaborate domestic dramas where their ragged children were better fed and more tenderly cared for than they themselves often were. Boys built miniature mills from mud and stones, creating complex water systems that demonstrated an intuitive understanding of engineering that would serve them well in their future labors. But perhaps the most important game was the simplest, the art of finding wonder in the mundane. A puddle became an ocean, a fallen log became a ship. A handful of pebbles became a treasure worthy of kings. These children, who would grow up to live lives of remarkable hardship, learned early that imagination was not an escape from reality, but a way of surviving it with dignity and tact. They played with death as easily as they played with life, because death was not hidden from them as it would be from children in later centuries. They made graves for dead birds, holding elaborate funeral processions with flower petals and solemn speeches delivered in voices trying very hard to sound adult. They played at being priests and mourners, not from morbidity, but from a practical understanding that death was simply another part of the world they were learning to navigate. When materials for toys were scarce, which was most of the time, children became master craftsmen of play. They wove grass into intricate patterns, built towers from acorns, created entire universes from mud and water and will. A broken pottery shard became a tiny plate for a fairy feast. A bird's feather became a quill for writing invisible letters to imaginary friends who lived beyond the hills. The games changed with the seasons, reflecting the rhythm of agricultural life that governed everything. In spring, children played with baby animals, learning gentleness and responsibility as they helped tend new lambs and chicks. Summer brought water games in streams and ponds, elaborate splashing contests and races across shallow rivers. Autumn meant games with fallen leaves, with harvest gleanings, with the nuts and berries that were both food and playthings. Winter, harsh but sometimes magical, brought games played by firelight, storytelling contests, and the rare joy of snow that could be shaped into temporary sculptures before melting back into the eternal mud. These children learned cooperation through play in ways that formal education never could have taught them. Games required negotiation, rule-making, fairness, and the ability to include the younger or weaker children without making them feel diminished. A game that left someone out was considered a failure, not because of any sophisticated understanding of inclusion, but because in a small village you needed everyone to make the game work. They developed elaborate ranking systems within their playgroups, hierarchies based not on birth or wealth, for they had little of either, but on imagination, fairness, and the ability to make others laugh. The child who could invent a new game, who could resolve disputes with wisdom beyond their years, who could find fun in the most unpromising circumstances. These were the natural leaders of their small societies. The laughter of these children rising from village squares and muddy fields was an act of resistance against a world that offered them little reason for joy. They insisted on wonder in the face of hardship, on community in the face of isolation, on hope in the face of uncertainty. Their games were not preparation for adult life so much as they were a declaration that life, even at its most difficult, could still contain moments of pure, uncomplicated happiness. And when they grew up, as they inevitably did, trading their improvised toys for real tools, their imaginary kingdoms for actual responsibilities. They carried something precious with them. Not just memories of childhood, but a deep understanding that joy could be created from nothing, that community could be built through play, and that the human spirit, when allowed to express itself freely, was capable of transforming even the harshest circumstances into something bearable, something meaningful, something that could be called home. These forgotten children who played with sticks and stones and mud and laughter, who found magic in the mundane and created community through imagination, left no monuments to their games. But they left something more important, a testament to the resilience of childhood, to the power of play, and to the quiet heroism of finding joy in a world that offered precious little of it. Their laughter has long since faded, but its echo remains, a reminder that even in the darkest times, children will find a way to play, to hope, and to transform the world through the simple act of refusing to let it break their spirits entirely. Medieval children lived in a world that would be unrecognizable to us today. Before the sun crested the horizon, before the first cockerel announced the dawn, they were already stirring on their straw mattresses, bodies aching from cold that had seeped through mud and wattle walls during the night. But for all its hardships, their world was also one of imagination, resourcefulness, and small joys discovered in the most unlikely places. Their fun wasn't found in toy stores or birthday parties. It was carved from wood with dull knives, fashioned from scraps of cloth, or simply invented from thin air and endless creativity. These children didn't wait for entertainment to be provided. They created it themselves with whatever the harsh medieval world offered them. The morning would begin with chores, always chores. Water to be fetched from wells that might be frozen solid. Animals to be fed with grain that was precious and scarce. Fires to be coaxed back to life from embers that had barely survived the night. But even in these tasks, medieval children found ways to make games. Who could carry the heaviest bucket without spilling? Who could make the chickens cluck the loudest? Competition was woven into survival, and survival became its own form of play. Their toys were miracles of ingenuity born from necessity. A wooden horse might be nothing more than a stick with a carved head, but in the hands of a child, it could gallop across imaginary kingdoms. Corn husks became dolls, complete with personalities and stories that unfolded day after day. Stones gathered from the yard transformed into armies, with each pebble representing a knight or a castle or a dragon, depending on the tale being told. They played with hoops made from willow branches, rolling them down muddy lanes with sticks, racing each other until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. They spun tops carved from wood, watching them dance on hard-packed earth floors while the wind howled outside. Simple pleasures, but profound ones. Each toy was precious because it had been made by hand, either their own or someone who loved them enough to spend precious time crafting something that served no purpose but joy. The games they invented required no equipment at all, just bodies and imagination. Hide and seek in barns thick with hay where you could burrow so deep that even your own mother couldn't find you. Tag through village streets that were more mud than road, leaping over puddles and dodging geese that had their own opinions about children running through their territory. Blind man's bluff in cottages so small that 3 steps could take you from wall to wall. but somehow the game felt as vast as a cathedral. They told stories by firelight, tales passed down from grandparents who had heard them from their own grandparents, stories that grew and changed with each telling. Stories of brave knights and clever peasants, of talking animals and magical objects, of worlds where the poor became rich and the weak became strong. These weren't just entertainment. They were maps of hope, showing children that transformation was possible, that cleverness could triumph over strength, that even the smallest person could change their fate. Music was everywhere, hummed while working, sung while walking, whistled while thinking. They made instruments from reeds and hollow bones, from stretched animal skins and carved wood. The sounds were simple but sweet, melodies that drifted across fields and through forest paths, connecting one cottage to another, one child's heart to another's. Dancing happened wherever feet could find rhythm. In barns during harvest festivals, in village squares during feast days, even in their own homes when the work was done and the fire was warm and someone started clapping a beat that made bodies want to move. They danced not because they were trained, but because music demanded it, because joy needed expression, because their young bodies craved movement even after long days of labor. The seasons shaped their play as surely as they shaped their work. Spring brought games with flowers, weaving crowns from daisies and dandelions, creating imaginary weddings and coronations. Summer meant swimming in streams and ponds, splashing and laughing until their lips turned blue and their mothers called them back to shore. Autumn was for gathering, not just crops but treasures. Colored leaves, smooth stones, interesting twigs that might become toys or tools or simply objects beautiful enough to keep. Winter was the hardest time when cold drove them indoors and darkness came early. But even then they found ways to play. Games played with fingers and words, riddles passed around the fire, stories that grew longer and more elaborate as the nights grew longer too. They carved figures from soap or soft wood. They played with shadows on the wall. They made pictures in the frost on windows that were nothing more than oiled cloth stretched over wooden frames. The church provided its own forms of entertainment, though it might not have intended to. Children found wonder in the ceremonies, in the music that echoed from stone walls, in the stories painted on walls and told in sermons. They made games of trying to sit still during long services, of counting how many times the priest cleared his throat, of imagining what the saints in the paintings might say if they could speak. Medieval children learned early that entertainment was something you created, not something you received. They learned to find joy in small things, to make much from little, to see magic in the ordinary world around them. A puddle could become a lake, a hill could become a mountain, a stick could become a sword, a wand, a horse, or a friend, depending on what the story required. They played with shadows and light, chasing sunbeams through windows, making shadow puppets with their hands, creating theaters on walls with nothing but firelight and imagination. They built castles from mud and sticks, creating entire kingdoms in their own backyards, complete with moats that were really just ditches filled with rainwater. Their games often mimicked the adult world around them, but transformed it into something magical. They played at being merchants, trading acorns for pebbles, leaves for flowers, creating elaborate economies where everything had value and every transaction was an adventure. They played at being knights and ladies, creating quests that led from the chicken coop to the garden to the well and back again. Each location transformed by imagination into something grand and mysterious. Even their work became play when shared with others. Spinning wool became a contest to see who could create the finest thread. Gathering eggs became a treasure hunt. Weeding gardens became battles against dragon weeds that threatened the kingdom of vegetables. They learned that almost any task could be made bearable, even enjoyable, if you brought the right attitude and enough imagination to it. The medieval child's world was harsh, dangerous, and often cruel. But it was also filled with wonder, creativity, and the kind of deep, satisfying play that comes from making something from nothing. From finding joy in the simplest things. From understanding that fun is not something you have, but something you create. In their laughter echoing across medieval fields, in their games played with sticks and stones and endless imagination, we see something timeless and beautiful. Children being children, finding light in darkness, creating magic from mud, and proving that joy, like hope, is one of the most resilient things in the human heart. Ancient children lived in a world where imagination had to flourish within the harsh boundaries of survival. Their days were structured not by school bells or scheduled activities, but by the rhythms of work, seasons, and necessity. Yet within these constraints, they created their own universes of play, learning, and wonder. The ancient child's day began before dawn, not with cartoons or cereal, but with chores that carried real weight. Water needed fetching, animals required feeding, and younger siblings demanded watching. But children, as they always have, found ways to transform obligation into adventure. The walk to the well became a race. Herding goats turned into elaborate games of strategy. Even grinding grain could become rhythmic, almost musical when done alongside friends. Their toys were born from necessity and imagination combined. A piece of broken pottery became a spinning top when weighted just right. Sticks transformed into horses, swords, or dolls depending on the day's adventure. Clay, when available, was molded into miniature animals, people, or vessels that mirrored the adult world they observed so carefully. These weren't mass-produced playthings, but personal creations, each one unique and precious. Games required no equipment beyond what nature provided. Children played versions of hide-and-seek among ruins and marketplaces. They competed in races, wrestling matches, and contests of skill that prepared them for adult responsibilities while still allowing for pure joy. Ball games used inflated animal bladders or tightly wound cloth. Dice games employed carved bones or stones, teaching mathematics and probability through play. Storytelling was perhaps their richest entertainment. Gathered around fires in the evening, children listened to tales that blended history, mythology, and moral instruction. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were education, cultural transmission, and imagination fuel all woven together. Children learned about heroes and monsters, gods and mortals, right and wrong, all through the ancient art of narrative. Music and dance were integral to childhood. Children sang work songs that made labor lighter, lullabies that soothed younger siblings, and celebration songs that marked festivals and victories. They created simple instruments from reeds, stretched skins, and hollow gourds. Dancing wasn't formal instruction, but natural expression. Bodies moving to rhythms that connected them to their community and their gods. Learning happened through observation and imitation rather than formal schooling. Children watched adults weave, smith, farm, cook, and heal, absorbing skills through proximity and practice. They learned to read the sky for weather, the ground for tracks, and faces for emotions. Their education was practical, immediate, and deeply connected to survival. Festivals provided the richest opportunities for play and wonder. During religious celebrations, harvest gatherings, or seasonal transitions, normal rules relaxed slightly. Children could stay up later, eat special foods, wear their best clothes, and participate in community rituals that made them feel part of something larger than themselves. Even in societies marked by hardship, children found moments of pure magic. They collected interesting stones, watched clouds form shapes, created secret languages with friends, and built elaborate imaginary worlds in hidden corners of their settlements. They domesticated insects, befriended stray animals, and turned every shadow into a potential adventure. The ancient child's relationship with nature was intimate and immediate. They knew which plants were safe to eat, which animals were dangerous, where the best climbing trees grew, and how to read the subtle signs that warned of storms or drought. This wasn't textbook knowledge, but lived experience, gained through daily interaction with the natural world. Their games often reflected the adult world they would soon enter. Girls practiced motherhood with dolls made from rags and sticks. Boys engaged in mock battles that taught coordination and strategy. Both sexes played house, learning social roles and relationships through imitation and experimentation. Competition was fierce but often playful. Children raced, jumped, threw objects for distance and accuracy, and engaged in contests of memory and wit. These competitions weren't just fun, they were preparation for the very real challenges that awaited them in adulthood. Art was everywhere in the ancient child's world. They drew in sand and dirt, carved simple figures in soft stone, wove grass into patterns, and decorated their bodies with natural pigments during celebrations. Every surface was a potential canvas, every material a possible medium for expression. The transition from childhood to adulthood was often marked by specific rituals and responsibilities rather than arbitrary age limits. Children gradually took on more serious duties, learned specialized skills, and began to see themselves as contributing members of their communities rather than dependents. Their relationship with death was also more immediate than modern children experience. They saw animals slaughtered for food, witnessed the passing of elderly relatives, and understood that life was fragile and precious. This knowledge, rather than traumatizing them, often made them more appreciative of joy and more resilient in the face of hardship. Play for ancient children was never separate from life. It was woven into the fabric of existence. They found humor in hardship, adventure in obligation, and wonder in the everyday. Their laughter echoed through villages, marketplaces, and fields, a sound that transcended time and circumstance. As darkness fell and families gathered for evening meals, children's voices joined the chorus of daily life. They recounted their adventures, shared their discoveries, and planned tomorrow's games. Even in a world that demanded early maturity and constant vigilance, childhood persisted, stubborn and irrepressible, finding ways to bloom in the smallest spaces and briefest moments. The ancient child reminds us that joy is not dependent on abundance, that imagination requires no technology, and that play is perhaps humanity's most enduring and essential characteristic. In their games and laughter, we hear echoes of our own childhood and glimpses of the eternal child that exists in every human heart, regardless of era or circumstance. The story of childhood in ancient times wasn't written in books or recorded in songs. It lived in the quiet moments between dawn and dusk, in the spaces where small hands learned to shape clay and young voices learned to mimic the calls of birds. Long before schools existed, before toys were mass-produced, before childhood was even recognized as a distinct phase of life, children found ways to play, to learn, to grow, and to discover joy in the simplest of things. In the ancient world, childhood was brief and precious. By the age of 7 or 8, most children were already working alongside their parents, learning trades, tending animals, or helping with the endless tasks of survival. But in those early years, before responsibility claimed them entirely, something beautiful happened. They played. Not with elaborate toys or structured activities, but with whatever the world offered them. A stick became a sword, a horse, a tool for drawing in the dirt. Smooth stones became dice, currency, or projectiles for games of skill. Clay from riverbanks transformed into dolls, animals, or miniature cooking pots. The games they played were often echoes of adult life, simplified and made safe for small hands. Children in ancient Egypt played house with reed dolls and miniature furniture carved from wood. They raced toy chariots pulled by wooden horses, mimicking the grand processions they witnessed in real life. Boys practiced warfare with blunted sticks, while girls learned domestic skills through elaborate games of pretend. But these weren't just mindless entertainment. They were preparation, education disguised as play. In Mesopotamia, children played a game called the royal game of Ur, moving pieces across a board according to the roll of tetrahedral dice. Archaeological evidence shows that even the youngest members of society had access to these games, suggesting that play was valued not just as distraction but as mental development. The rules were passed down orally from older children to younger ones, creating bonds across generations and teaching patience, strategy, and social interaction. Ancient Greek children had their own rich tradition of play. They spun tops, played with yo-yos made from clay discs, and engaged in complex games of knucklebones using the ankle bones of sheep or goats as dice. Girls often played with jointed dolls made from terracotta, complete with movable arms and legs. Boys favored hoops, rolling them with sticks through the streets, racing each other with shouts of joy that echoed off marble columns. But perhaps the most universal of all childhood activities was storytelling. Around fires in the evening, children would gather to hear tales of gods and heroes, of talking animals and magical transformations. These stories served multiple purposes. They entertained, yes, but they also educated, passing down cultural values, moral lessons, and practical wisdom. Children would then retell these stories to each other, embellishing them, changing them, making them their own. In many cultures, children created their own secret languages, their own games, their own rules that adults couldn't quite understand. They built forts from branches and leaves, created entire imaginary worlds in garden corners, and developed complex social hierarchies based on age, skill, or sheer force of personality. These childhood societies were often remarkably sophisticated, with their own forms of justice, leadership, and cooperation. The materials for play were humble but infinite in possibility. River reeds became flutes, producing haunting melodies that drifted across fields. Flower petals became currency in elaborate games of trade. Shadows on walls became puppets telling stories without words. Even work could become play when done in groups, with children turning harvesting into races, spinning into competitions, and animal care into elaborate games of responsibility and pride. Music and dance were integral to childhood in the ancient world. Children learned songs before they learned to speak clearly, absorbing rhythm and melody along with language itself. They danced at festivals, mimicking adult ceremonies, but adding their own spontaneous movements, their own interpretations of joy. These weren't formal lessons, but organic learning passed from child to child like whispered secrets. Physical games were essential too. Children raced, jumped, wrestled, and climbed, developing strength and coordination through play rather than formal exercise. They played tag in temple courtyards, hide and seek among market stalls, and elaborate games of chase that could last for hours. These activities weren't just fun, they were survival training, developing the speed, agility, and spatial awareness that might save their lives in a dangerous world. Seasonal changes brought new opportunities for play. Spring meant flower games, weaving chains and crowns, creating elaborate decorations for hair and clothing. Summer brought water games, splashing in streams, building dams with stones, racing leaf boats downstream. Autumn meant harvest games, competitions to see who could gather the most nuts or berries, elaborate constructions made from fallen leaves. Winter brought its own pleasures. Snow sculptures in northern climates, indoor games during long dark evenings, storytelling marathons that could last until dawn. Children in ancient times learned to make their own entertainment from whatever was available. They carved whistles from hollow reeds, fashioned dolls from corn husks, created elaborate cities in sandbox areas near their homes. Their imaginations were powerful because they had to be. Without ready-made entertainment, they learned to see possibility everywhere, to transform the mundane into the magical through sheer force of creativity. The social aspects of childhood play were just as important as the individual activities. Children formed gangs and clubs complete with initiation rites, secret handshakes, and elaborate hierarchies. They learned to negotiate, to compromise, to lead and follow. They developed empathy through role-playing games where they took turns being parent and child, teacher and student, ruler and subject. Competition was a natural part of childhood play, but it was balanced by cooperation. Children learned that some games required teamwork, that helping others could be more satisfying than winning alone. They developed codes of honor, unspoken rules about fairness, justice, and mutual respect. These early social experiences shaped their understanding of community, responsibility, and human nature. Perhaps most remarkably, children in ancient times learned to find joy in the smallest things. A butterfly landing on a flower could provide hours of entertainment. A puddle after rain became an ocean for tiny boats. The changing patterns of clouds overhead became stories, adventures, entire mythologies created and shared in the moment. Their toys were simple but cherished. A doll made from rags and straw was loved as fiercely as any modern plaything. A wooden hoop was treasured, decorated with ribbons or painted designs. These objects weren't just possessions, they were companions, friends, repositories of imagination and memory. Even work became play when children did it together. Grinding grain could become a rhythm game, with children synchronizing their movements and creating chants to match. Weaving could become storytelling, with patterns representing characters and plots. Animal care could become elaborate dramas, with children assigning personalities to sheep and goats, creating complex relationships and adventures for their charges. The ancient world was harsh, and childhood was often brief. But in those precious early years before the weight of adult responsibility settled on young shoulders, children found ways to laugh, to play, to dream, and to discover wonder in the world around them. They created games from nothing, found joy in simplicity, and developed the imagination and resilience that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As we reflect on these glimpses into the lives of children from centuries past, we begin to understand that the essence of childhood has remained remarkably consistent throughout human history. Despite the vast differences in technology, society, and living conditions, children have always possessed that unique ability to find wonder in the mundane, to create magic from the ordinary, and to discover joy in the simplest of circumstances. The medieval child who spent hours carving a wooden knight from a discarded piece of oak was engaging in the same fundamental human activity as the modern child who builds elaborate structures with blocks or creates digital worlds in video games. Both are exercises in imagination, creativity, and the innate human desire to build, create, and explore possibilities beyond the immediate reality. The materials may have changed, but the underlying drive remains the same. Consider how these ancient children developed their sense of community and belonging. In an age before social media, instant communication, or even widespread literacy, children formed deep, meaningful connections through shared experiences of play. They learned to read social cues, navigate complex group dynamics, and understand their place in the larger community through games that mimicked adult society. The elaborate role-playing games they created served as both entertainment and education, preparing them for the responsibilities they would eventually assume, while allowing them to explore different aspects of personality and leadership. The seasonal nature of their play also reveals something profound about their connection to the natural world. Unlike many modern children who live in climate-controlled environments and may have limited awareness of seasonal changes, these ancient children lived in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Their games and activities shifted with the seasons, not just out of necessity, but because they understood intuitively that different times of year called for different kinds of play and different kinds of joy. Spring brought games of renewal and growth. Summer offered opportunities for outdoor adventures and exploration. Autumn was a time for harvest celebrations and preparation, and winter encouraged indoor creativity and storytelling. The resourcefulness these children displayed in creating their own entertainment speaks to a kind of ingenuity that modern society often struggles to cultivate. When every toy had to be made by hand, when every game had to be invented from scratch, children developed a deep appreciation for the creative process itself. They understood that the joy often lay not just in the finished product, but in the making, the planning, the problem-solving, and the collaboration required to bring their ideas to life. Their storytelling traditions reveal another crucial aspect of childhood development that transcends time and culture. These children were both the creators and the audience for elaborate tales that served multiple purposes simultaneously. Stories entertained, educated, preserved cultural knowledge, and provided frameworks for understanding complex emotions and moral situations. The child who listened to tales of brave knights and clever peasants was learning about courage, justice, and the importance of wit over strength. The child who participated in creating these stories was developing language skills, narrative understanding, and the ability to communicate complex ideas to others. Music and rhythm played central roles in their lives in ways that modern children might find difficult to imagine. Without recorded music or electronic instruments, every song had to be created fresh each time it was performed. Children learned to make music with their voices, with simple instruments crafted from available materials, and with the rhythm of their own bodies. They understood that music was not something consumed passively, but something created actively and shared communally. Dance was not a performance for others to watch, but a participatory activity that brought people together and expressed shared emotions and experiences. The physical nature of their play also deserves consideration. These children developed strength, coordination, and endurance through their daily activities and games. They climbed trees, ran across uneven terrain, worked with their hands to create and build, and used their entire bodies as tools for play and exploration. Their games often involved physical challenges that helped them develop not just strength and agility, but also courage, persistence, and the ability to assess and manage risk. They learned to trust their bodies and to push their physical limits in ways that prepared them for the demanding physical realities of adult life in their time. Perhaps most remarkably, these children managed to find joy and create meaning despite living in circumstances that would challenge even the most resilient modern adult. They faced uncertainties about food, shelter, and safety that are foreign to most children in developed nations today. Yet they did not allow these hardships to crush their spirits or destroy their capacity for wonder. Instead, they developed a kind of resilience that enabled them to find happiness in small moments, to create beauty from humble materials, and to maintain hope even in difficult circumstances. Their approach to learning was also fundamentally different from modern educational models. Rather than sitting in classrooms absorbing information passively, these children learned through active participation in the world around them. They learned about agriculture by helping with planting and harvesting, about craftsmanship by watching and assisting skilled artisans, about social relationships by participating in community activities, and about problem solving by facing real challenges that required creative solutions. Their play was seamlessly integrated with their learning, making education a natural and enjoyable part of daily life rather than a separate, often tedious obligation. The social structures of their play reveal sophisticated understanding of human relationships and community dynamics. Children created elaborate hierarchies and systems of governance for their games, experimenting with different forms of leadership and social organization. They learned to negotiate, compromise, and resolve conflicts through their play experiences. They developed empathy by taking on different roles and seeing situations from multiple perspectives. They learned about fairness, justice, and the importance of rules and social contracts through games that required cooperation and mutual respect. Their relationship with adults was also markedly different from modern patterns. Rather than existing in a separate world of childhood, these children were integrated into adult society from an early age. They observed adult activities closely, participated in adult work when appropriate, and learned from adult models in their immediate environment. Yet they also maintained their own distinct culture of childhood, with games, stories, and traditions that were passed down from older children to younger ones, creating a rich intergenerational tradition of play and learning. The creativity these children displayed in transforming ordinary objects into extraordinary playthings demonstrates a kind of imagination that is both inspiring and instructive. A simple stick could become a sword, a scepter, a magic wand, or a horse, depending on the needs of the game and the creativity of the player. Rocks could be transformed into precious gems, building blocks, or characters in an elaborate story. Water could become a magical potion, a mirror for scrying, or an ocean for miniature adventures. This ability to see potential in the mundane and to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary is perhaps one of the most valuable skills these children developed. Their understanding of time was also different from modern concepts. Without clocks and rigid schedules, these children learned to measure time by natural rhythms and seasonal changes. They understood that some activities were appropriate for certain times of day or year, but they also had the luxury of allowing activities to unfold naturally without artificial time constraints. A game could last for hours if it was engaging and meaningful, or it could be abandoned quickly if it failed to capture their interest. This organic approach to time management allowed for deep engagement and thorough exploration of ideas and activities. The legacy of these ancient children extends far beyond their immediate historical moment. Many of the games they played, the stories they told, and the traditions they created have been passed down through generations, evolving and adapting to new circumstances while maintaining their essential character. Modern children still play versions of hide-and-seek, tag, and other games that have roots stretching back centuries or even millennia. The basic human impulses that drove these ancient children to create, explore, and play continue to manifest in contemporary childhood, even as the specific forms and contexts have changed dramatically. Their example also offers valuable insights for modern parents, educators, and policymakers who are concerned about childhood development in an increasingly complex and technologically sophisticated world. These ancient children demonstrate that happiness and healthy development do not require expensive toys, elaborate entertainment systems, or constant adult supervision and intervention. Instead, they suggest that children thrive when given opportunities for unstructured play, when encouraged to use their imagination and creativity, when allowed to take appropriate risks and face manageable challenges, and when supported by caring communities that value their contributions and respect their developing autonomy. As we drift towards sleep, contemplating these images of children from long ago, we might find comfort in the continuity of human experience across time and cultures. Despite all the changes in technology, society, and living conditions, the fundamental aspects of childhood remain remarkably constant. Children still seek joy, create meaning, form relationships, and explore their world with wonder and curiosity. They still need opportunities for play, challenges that help them grow, and communities that support their development. They still find ways to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, to create beauty from simple materials, and to discover magic in everyday experiences. As we draw our journey through the playful worlds of ancient children to a close, we find ourselves with a profound appreciation for the timeless nature of childhood joy. These young souls from centuries past have shown us that happiness doesn't require the latest technology or expensive toys. Instead, it springs from something far more fundamental: the boundless creativity that lives within every child's heart. The children of ancient Egypt who sailed their reed boats down the Nile, the young Romans who played with their wooden hoops in the streets of the empire, and the medieval children who danced around maypoles in village squares all shared something remarkable with the children of today. They possessed an innate ability to find wonder in the world around them, to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary through the simple power of imagination. Their games were not just pastimes, but essential threads in the fabric of their communities. When a group of children gathered to play a game of knucklebones or organize a mock battle with wooden swords, they were doing much more than entertaining themselves. They were learning the social skills that would serve them throughout their lives, practicing the art of cooperation, negotiation, and leadership. They were absorbing the values and traditions of their culture, ensuring that the wisdom of their ancestors would continue to flow through generations like a gentle river carrying precious cargo. The seasonal rhythms that governed their play connected them deeply to the natural world in ways that many children today might find foreign. When spring arrived, they didn't simply notice it on a calendar, but felt it in their bones as new games and activities became possible. Summer brought different joys, autumn its own unique pleasures, and winter its special magic. This connection to the cycles of nature gave their play a richness and depth that came from being truly present in their environment. We've seen how these ancient children developed remarkable resilience through their play. Living in times when life was unpredictable and often harsh, they learned to find joy even in the darkest moments. A child who could fashion a doll from corn husks or create an entire adventure with nothing but a stick and some stones possessed a kind of wealth that couldn't be taken away by circumstances. This inner resourcefulness became a source of strength that would serve them well throughout their lives. The storytelling traditions that flourished in these ancient times reveal another beautiful aspect of childhood from long ago. Children weren't just passive recipients of entertainment, but active participants in creating and sharing stories. They learned to weave tales that could transport listeners to magical realms, teach important lessons, or simply bring laughter to a weary day. In doing so, they became keepers of their culture's memory, ensuring that important stories would survive and continue to guide future generations. Perhaps most remarkably, these children understood instinctively that play was not separate from life, but an essential part of it. When they played house, they weren't just pretending, but preparing. When they engaged in mock battles or competitive games, they were developing skills they would need as adults. When they created art with clay or sang songs passed down through generations, they were participating in the great human tradition of creativity and expression. The community aspect of their play teaches us something valuable about human connection. In an age before individual entertainment devices, children naturally came together to create shared experiences. They learned to include others, to adapt games so everyone could participate, and to find joy in collective achievement. These skills created strong social bonds that would support them throughout their lives. As we consider the legacy of these ancient children, we might reflect on what their experiences can teach us today. In our modern world filled with sophisticated toys and digital entertainment, there's something profoundly moving about the simple joy these children found in a game of marbles or an afternoon spent building castles in the sand. They remind us that the most important ingredients for happiness are often the most basic: imagination, friendship, and the freedom to play. Their resilience in the face of hardship offers inspiration for anyone facing challenges. These children showed us that even in the most difficult circumstances, the human spirit can find ways to create beauty, joy, and meaning. They transformed their limitations into opportunities, their scarcity into creativity, and their struggles into strength. The ancient children we've met in this journey have been our teachers, showing us that across all cultures and throughout all time, childhood has remained essentially the same. Children have always sought to play, to learn, to grow, and to find their place in the world. They have always possessed the remarkable ability to find wonder in simplicity, and to create something beautiful from whatever materials life provides them. In their laughter echoing across the centuries, in their games that have evolved but never disappeared, and in their endless capacity for joy, these ancient children remind us of the eternal nature of childhood wonder. They assure us that no matter how much the world changes, the spirit of play and the power of imagination will always find a way to flourish.